Welcome, dear listeners, to Poisoned Ink of Lady Greystone, a cozy Miss Marple mystery in the timeless style of Agatha Christie. Settle into your favorite armchair with a cup of tea as we journey to the charming village of St. Mary Mead in the 1950s. Here, amidst blooming gardens and whispered secrets, our sharp-eyed elderly sleuth, Miss Jane Marple, unravels a puzzling death. This tale of clever clues and village intrigue is perfect for a relaxing evening. Narrated for your enjoyment, our story unfolds in 10 chapters. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Shadow over Greystone Manor. In the quaint village of St. Mary Mead, nestled in the rolling hills of the English countryside, the summer of 1952 unfolded with the serene predictability of a well-loved novel. The church bells chimed at precisely 9 each morning, their melody drifting over cobblestone lanes and hedgerows bursting with wild roses. Children scampered across the village green, their laughter mingling with the hum of bees and the clatter of the milkman's cart. It was a place where time seemed to pause, where every face was familiar, and every secret, though hidden, was as much a part of the village as the ancient oak by the pond. Miss Jane Marple, an elderly spinster with a mind as sharp as her knitting needles, sat in her modest cottage at the heart of St. Mary Mead. Her sitting room was a study in cozy order, a chintz-covered armchair by the hearth, a polished mahogany table bearing a silver tea tray, and a window framed with lace curtains that offered a perfect view of the village's comings and goings. Her hands, though frail with age, moved deftly as she worked on an intricate woolen scarf, its pattern as complex as the thoughts weaving through her mind. Miss Marple had a gift for observation, honed over decades of watching the world from her quiet corner. She saw not about it. Miss Marple's needles paused mid-stitch, her pale blue eyes lifting to meet Dolly's. "Queer, you say, Dolly? Do tell." Her voice was soft, almost musical, but there was a keenness in it, like a blade hidden in velvet. Dolly leaned closer, lowering her voice as if the walls themselves might eavesdrop. They found her with her fountain pen in hand, ink spilled all over her papers. And her lips, oh miss, they were blue, an unnatural blue, like the ink itself. Dr. Haydock says it's a heart attack, but Mrs. Price at the tea room swears it's poison. Poison in St. Mary Mead. Can you imagine? Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile, though her eyes remained sharp. People are the same everywhere, Dolly, even in our peaceful village. Secrets fester like weeds in a garden, and poison, I'm afraid, is not so rare as we'd like to think. She set her knitting aside, her mind already turning over the possibilities. A heart attack was tidy, convenient, but blue lips and spilled ink suggested a story far less ordinary. "Tell me, who found her?" "Bessie Turner, the housemaid," Dolly replied, wringing her hands. Poor girl's in a state. She went in to bring Lady Greystone her morning tea and found her cold as stone. The inspector's up at the manor now, Slack, that gruff one from Much Benham. He's poking about, but you know how he is, all bluster and no patience. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. Inspector Slack was competent in his way, but he lacked the subtlety to see what lay beneath the surface. She recalled a case years ago in a neighboring village where a similar death, attributed to natural causes, had unraveled into a tale of jealousy and deceit. "And what do we know of Lady Greystone?" she asked, though she already knew much of the answer. Lady Eleanor Greystone was a figure both revered and enigmatic in St. Mary Mead. A celebrated authoress of historical novels, her works filled the shelves of the village bookshop and the hearts of readers across England. She had moved to Greystone Manor a decade to pick up her needles again. "Bitter ink," she murmured. "Curious." Her mind flashed to a long-ago conversation with a chemist in London who had spoken of toxic inks used in rare manuscripts. Prussian blue, laced with compounds that could kill if ingested. But such things were surely relics of another era. Or were they? "I think, Dolly, I shall take a walk to Greystone Manor this afternoon. A condolence call is only proper, after all." Dolly gasped. "You're going to poke about, aren't you, miss? Oh, be careful. If it's poison, there's a murderer among us." Miss Marple's smile was serene, but her eyes gleamed with purpose. "Careful is my middle name, Dolly. Now, fetch my hat and shawl, and let's see what the manor has to tell us." The walk to Greystone Manor was a pleasant one, though the June sun was tempered by a breeze that rustled the leaves overhead. St. Mary Mead was at its loveliest, with hollyhocks nodding along garden walls and the blacksmith's hammer ringing in the distance. Miss Marple moved slowly, her black lace-up shoes tapping softly on the path, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. To passers-by, she was merely an elderly lady out for a stroll, but her mind was a whirl of questions. Blue lips, a bitter taste, a spilled inkwell. Each detail was a thread, and she was determined to weave them into a pattern. Greystone Manor stood at the end of a winding lane, its wrought iron gates rusted but imposing. The gardens were overgrown, roses tangling with weeds, as if the manor itself were retreating from the world. Miss Marple approached the front door where a young constable stood guard, looking bored. He recognized her, most in St. Mary Mead did, and tipped his cap. "Morning, Miss Marple. Come to pay respects?" "Indeed, Constable Reed," she replied, her voice gentle but firm. "A tragedy like this touches us all. May I see the family?" The constable hesitated, then nodded. "They're in the drawing room, miss, but mind Inspector Slack's about and he's in a mood." Her brown hair pulled into a severe bun, her fingers stained with ink. Lady Greystone was writing her masterpiece, she said softly, her eyes darting to Reginald. A novel about the village, full of secrets. She trusted no one with it but me. Victor Hale, a rival author from London, lounged in an armchair, his polished smile at odds with the occasion. "Eleanor and I were to collaborate," he said, though his tone suggested rivalry more than partnership. "Poison? Absurd. She was simply under strain." Bessie Turner, the young housemaid, hovered near the door, her apron twisted in her hands. "Milady was kind," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But she had enemies. That ink. She said it tasted odd, bitter-like these past weeks." Miss Marple's eyes took in every detail. The overturned inkwell on the desk, its contents staining the blotter a deep blue. A half-written letter in Lady Greystone's elegant hand, its words smudged. And a faint, almost imperceptible scent in the air, like almonds gone sour. She recalled that scent from a case long ago. Cyanide, subtle but deadly. Inspector Slack bustled in, his face red with impatience. "Miss Marple, what brings you here? This is a police matter, not a knitting circle." "Merely offering condolences," she replied, her tone mild but her gaze steady, though I couldn't help but notice the ink. Such a curious shade. Slack snorted. "Heart attack, plain and simple. The doctor's certain. No need for your fancies." Miss Marple inclined her head, saying nothing. But as she left the manor, her mind was alight with possibilities. Poisoned ink, a bitter taste, blue lips. These were no fancies, but clues to a murder most cunning. St. Mary Mead, for all its charm, harbored a darkness, and Miss Marple was determined to bring it to light. Chapter 2. The Gathering at the Manor. The sun hung high over St. Mary Mead, casting dappled shadows through the ancient elms that lined the lane to Greystone Manor. The village, still abuzz with the shocking news of Lady Eleanor, noting the faint scuff marks on the path, as if someone had hurried through in the night. A clue, perhaps, or merely the haste of a delivery boy. She filed it away, her mind a ledger of such details. The young constable, Reed, still stood guard at the manor's entrance, his cap slightly askew from the warmth of the day. He straightened as Miss Marple approached, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Back again, Miss Marple," he said, his tone more curious than challenging. "The family's in the drawing room, but Inspector Slack's been stomping about, muttering about paperwork." "Thank you, Constable," Miss Marple replied, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze, but with an undercurrent of purpose. "I shan't trouble them long. A condolence call is only proper after all." She offered a small smile, and Reed, reassured by her unassuming demeanor, stepped aside to let her pass. The entrance hall of Greystone Manor was a cavern of faded elegance. A crystal chandelier hung overhead, its prisms dulled by dust, and a grand staircase curved upward, its banister worn smooth by generations of hands. Portraits of stern Greystone ancestors lined the walls, their painted gazes seeming to follow Miss Marple as she was led to the drawing room by a nervous footman. The air carried the faint scent of old books and wax polish, tinged with something sharper, perhaps the memory of that almond-like odor Miss Marple had noted earlier. In the drawing room, a somber gathering awaited. The space was vast, yet stifling, its heavy velvet curtains drawn against the sun, casting the room in a muted glow. A marble fireplace stood cold, its mantel adorned with porcelain figurines and a silver-framed photograph of Lady Greystone in her youth, her eyes bright with ambition. The late authoress's presence lingered, as if her spirit still hovered over the mahogany writing desk in the corner, where the fatal inkwell sat, its contents now sealed in an evidence bag by Inspector Slack's orders. Miss Marple's arrival drew curious gossips. She recalled Dolly Bantry's whisper that morning. Reginald had debts, gambling debts, that had strained his relationship with his aunt. A motive, perhaps? But motives, Miss Marple knew, were like shadows, ever present, but not always substantial. Seated on a velvet settee was Miss Lydia Finch, Lady Greystone's devoted secretary. She was a woman in her mid-40s, her brown hair pulled into a severe bun, her plain gray dress as unassuming as her demeanor. Yet her hands, folded tightly in her lap, bore the telltale stains of ink, a badge of her trade. Lady Greystone was writing her masterpiece, Lydia said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. a novel about St. Mary Mead, full of secrets and scandals. She trusted no one with it but me. Her eyes flicked to Reginald, a flash of resentment quickly masked. Miss Marple noted the tension, wondering if Lydia's devotion hid a deeper grievance. Secretaries, she knew from experience, often saw more than they were meant to. Lounging in an armchair, his polished shoes propped on an ottoman, was Victor Hale, a rival author from London. His tailored suit and slicked-back blonde hair spoke of city sophistication, but his smile was too smooth, like a page torn from one of his own thriller novels. "Eleanor and I were to collaborate on a project," he said, his tone light but his eyes cold. "A grand historical epic. Poison? Absurd. She was under pressure, that's all. Writers like us live on the edge of exhaustion." He waved a hand dismissively, but Miss Marple caught the faintest tightening of his jaw. Victor's career, she recalled, had faltered in recent years, his novels overshadowed by Lady Greystone's success. Envy, she knew, could be a poison of its own. Hovering near the door was Bessie Turner, the young housemaid, her apron twisted in her small, work-roughened hands. She was no more than 19, with wide brown eyes and a nervous habit of biting her lip. "Milady was kind," Bessie whispered, her voice trembling as she met Miss Marple's gaze. "But she had enemies. That ink she used, it was special, imported for her fountain pen." Words were illegible, but the paper bore the faint impression of Lady Greystone's elegant script, as if she had pressed hard in her final moments. A clue, perhaps? Or a distraction? Miss Marple's mind turned to a case from her youth, where a letter had held the key to a murder, hidden in plain sight. As she chatted with the group, her questions gentle but probing, Miss Marple observed their interactions. Reginald avoided Lydia's gaze, his fingers drumming on the windowsill. Lydia's hands twitched, as if longing to tidy the desk, her eyes darting to the inkwell's empty evidence bag. Victor's laughter was too loud, his anecdotes about London publishing circles a touch too rehearsed. Bessie, meanwhile, hovered like a ghost, her nervous glances suggesting she knew more than she said. The village's warmth seeped into the room despite the gloom. A distant peal of laughter from children on the green, the clink of teacups as the footman offered refreshments. Yet beneath it all, Miss Marple sensed a current of unease. She recalled a similar gathering years ago, in a village not unlike St. Mary Mead, where a seemingly natural death had unraveled into a web of deceit. The key, she knew, lay in the everyday, the habits, the glances, the things left unsaid. As she prepared to leave, Miss Marple paused by the desk, her fingers brushing the blotter. "Such a lovely shade of ink," she murmured almost to herself. "Prussian blue, isn't it? So rare these days." Lydia's head snapped up, her face pale, but she said nothing. Victor chuckled, dismissing the comment as an old lady's fancy. Reginald's eyes narrowed, and Bessie's hands twisted her apron tighter. Outside, the sun was dipping toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the manor's overgrown gardens. Miss Marple walked slowly back to the village, her mind a whirl of impressions. The spilled ink, the bitter taste, the almond scent. These were no mere fancies, but threads in a pattern she was beginning to discern. St. Mary Mead, with its cozy cottages and blooming roses, harbored another thread into the mystery of Lady Greystone's death. Mrs. Price's tea room was a haven of warmth and familiarity, its walls adorned with faded floral wallpaper and shelves lined with mismatched teapots. The room buzzed with the low hum of conversation, punctuated by the occasional laugh or clink of a spoon. Villagers gathered at small round tables, their faces familiar to Miss Marple from years of quiet observation. Mrs. Weatherby, the postmistress, who knew every letter's journey. Mr. Pye, the florist, whose flair for drama rivaled any novel. And young Tommy Pierce, the butcher's apprentice, who lingered longer than necessary with his deliveries. Miss Marple settled into her usual corner table, her knitting bag at her side, and ordered a pot of tea and a scone, her eyes scanning the room like a gardener inspecting her roses. Mrs. Price, a plump woman with a perpetual smile and flour-dusted apron, bustled over with the tea. "Oh, Miss Marple, isn't it dreadful about Lady Greystone?" she said, her voice a mix of sorrow and excitement. "Found dead at her desk, they say, with that fancy pen of hers in hand. Dr. Haydock's calling it a heart attack, but I heard from Bessie Turner, blue lips, Miss Marple, blue as her ink. What do you make of it?" Miss Marple's pale blue eyes twinkled behind her spectacles as she poured her tea, the steam curling upward like a wisp of thought. "People do talk, Mrs. Price," she said softly, her tone as gentle as the breeze outside. "But talk is like a garden, full of weeds unless you tend it carefully. Tell me, what else have you heard?" Mrs. Price leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Well, there's talk of poison, of course. Bessie says Lady Greystone complained her ink tasted bitter, like metal, she said. And that novel she was writing, all about St. Mary Mead's secrets. They say it was full of scandals, the kind that'd make the vicar blush. Why, I heard she had a row with old Mr. Hargrove, the bookseller, over some of her ideas," said, settling into the chair opposite. "This business with Lady Greystone. It's shaken the village. She was a generous soul, always supporting the church, but her tongue could be sharp. I fear her death may stir up old wounds." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze steady. "Old wounds, Reverend. Do share. In a village like ours, the past is never far from the present." The Reverend sighed, his fingers fidgeting with a sugar spoon. "Lady Greystone had a falling out with Mr. Hargrove some months ago. He claimed her novels borrowed too freely from his collection of historical manuscripts. She laughed it off, called him a pedant, but it rankled him. And then there's Reginald, her nephew. They argued the night before her death, something about money, I gather. The poor lad's in debt, you know." Miss Marple nodded, her memory of Reginald's nervous demeanor at the manor sharpening. "Money is a powerful motive," she murmured. "But so is pride." "And what of Miss Finch, the secretary? Or Mr. Hale, the rival author?" Reverend Clement's brow furrowed. "Lydia Finch is devoted, but quiet. Too quiet, perhaps. She lived in Lady Greystone's shadow, managing her letters, her manuscripts, even her ink orders. As for Victor Hale, he's a city sort, all charm and ambition. I heard he was jealous of Eleanor's success, especially after his last novel flopped. But poison? Surely not." Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. "Ideas are like birds, Reverend. They fly where they will, but they leave traces." She recalled Lydia's ink-stained fingers, Victor's polished smile, and Bessie's nervous whispers about the bitter ink. Each was a thread, but the pattern remained elusive. As the tea-room filled with the chatter of new arrivals, Miss Marple's ears caught snatches of gossip.
Mrs. Weatherby, at a nearby table, spoke of Lydia buying a new bottle of ink from the chemist last week. Odd, since Lady Greystone was so particular.
The rustle of Mrs. Price's apron as she bustled about. St. Mary Mead was a village of comfort, of community. Yet beneath its surface lay currents of envy, greed, and resentment. Miss Marple knew these currents well, having seen them in countless faces over the years. The curate who coveted the vicar's post, the shopkeeper who cheated his neighbor, the spinster who hid a broken heart. Human nature, she thought, was the same everywhere, and St. Mary Mead was no exception. As she finished her tea, Miss Marple's eyes fell on a small detail, a smudge of blue ink on Mrs. Price's apron, likely from handling a letter. It was a faint mark, but it reminded her of the spilled inkwell at the manor, the smudged letter, the blue stain on Lydia's fingers. "Mrs. Price," she said casually, "do you ever use fountain pens? Such a lovely shade, that blue." Mrs. Price laughed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Oh no, Miss Marple, I'm all thumbs with those things. This smudge must have come from a customer's note, but it's not half as fine as Lady Greystone's ink. Prussian blue, she called it. Imported special." Miss Marple nodded, her smile serene but her mind racing. Prussian blue, a pigment once laced with toxic compounds in older formulations. Could someone have tampered with it? She thought of the chemist's shop, where Lydia had been seen, and the bitter taste Lady Greystone had complained of. The pieces were scattered, but they were beginning to form a picture. As she rose to leave, the Reverend touched her arm. "Miss Marple, you'll be careful, won't you? If there's truth to this poison talk, there's danger in St. Mary Mead." "Danger, Reverend, is like a weed," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "It grows quietly until you root it out." With a polite nod, she stepped out into the afternoon light. The village green alive with children playing and the postman cycling by. Yet her thoughts were elsewhere, piecing together the clues. Blue lips. These were no mere accidents, but pieces of a puzzle that demanded careful assembly. Her visit to the tea room had yielded a wealth of gossip, as she'd expected. But one detail lingered like a burr. The midnight visitor Tommy Pierce had mentioned. A shadowy figure seen near Greystone Manor the night before Lady Greystone's death. It was the kind of tale that could ignite a village's imagination, and Miss Marple knew better than to dismiss it outright. Yet she also knew that such stories often grew in the telling, like a poorly tended vine. As she approached the village post office, where the postman, Mr. Dobbs, was known to linger with his pipe and tales, she resolved to sift fact from fancy. The post office was a small ivy-covered building, its window adorned with notices for the upcoming village fete, and a faded poster for Lady Greystone's latest novel. Mr. Dobbs, a wiry man with a weathered face and a penchant for exaggeration, stood outside, puffing on his pipe. He tipped his cap as Miss Marple approached, his eyes glinting with the eagerness of one who loved an audience. "Afternoon, Miss Marple," he said, his voice gravelly. "Terrible business at the manor, ain't it? I heard you was up there, pokin' about." Miss Marple smiled, her expression as gentle as the breeze. "Merely paying my respects, Mr. Dobbs. But I did hear a curious thing at the tea room. Something about a stranger near the manor last night. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Mr. Dobbs's eyes widened and he leaned closer, his pipe smoke curling upward like a question mark. "Oh, I saw it myself. Round midnight I was cycling back from Much Benham. Late delivery, you see. And there was a figure skulking by the manor gates. Tall, cloaked-like, moving quick. Couldn't see the face, but it weren't no one from the village, I'd swear to it. Reckon it's got summat to do with Lady Greystone's death?" Miss Marple's knitting bag hung at her side, and she adjusted it thoughtfully, her mind turning over the manor and its inhabitants. Reginald Greystone, with his debts and nervous glances. Lydia Finch, with her ink-stained fingers and quiet resentment. Victor Hale, with his polished charm and hidden envy. And Bessie Turner, with her whispered tales of bitter ink. Her next stop was the village bookshop, a cramped, dusty haven run by Mr. Hargrove, the bookseller Reverend Clement had mentioned. The shop was a treasure trove of leather-bound tomes and yellowing manuscripts, its air thick with the musty scent of old paper. Mr. Hargrove, a stooped man in his 60s with a perpetual scowl, was rearranging a display of historical novels, Lady Greystone's among them. His eyes narrowed as Miss Marple entered, the bell above the door jingling softly. "Good afternoon, Mr. Hargrove," she said, her voice as mild as a summer rain. "I was just passing and thought to browse. Lady Greystone's death must be a shock to you, given her love for books." Mr. Hargrove's scowl deepened, his gnarled hands clutching a volume tightly. "Shock? She was a customer, nothing more. Though I'll not deny she caused me grief. Her novels, stealing ideas from my rare manuscripts, she was. I told her so months back, but she laughed in my face, called me a dusty old fool." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the display where a bottle of antique ink caught her eye. Prussian blue, the label read, its glass stopper gleaming faintly. "Such a curious shade," she remarked, her tone casual. "Did Lady Greystone ever purchase ink from you? I hear she was particular about her fountain pen." Mr. Hargrove snorted. "Her? She imported her ink. Fancy stuff from France. Never bought a drop from me. But I'll tell you this, Miss Marple, someone's been tampering with my stock. One of them blue bottles went missing last week, and I ain't seen it since." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. A missing bottle of ink, Prussian blue, known in older formulation, the Waters. Back in the village, the news of the midnight visitor had spread, thanks to Mr. Dobbs's loose tongue. Inspector Slack was in a fervor, questioning villagers and declaring the stranger a prime suspect. Miss Marple overheard him at the village green, his voice booming as he interrogated Tommy Pierce, who now seemed less certain of his story. "It might have been a shadow," Tommy admitted, shuffling his feet. "Or maybe just old Mr. Pye, out late with his flowers." Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. The midnight visitor was unraveling as quickly as a poorly knit scarf, but it had served its purpose, drawing attention from the real clues. The ink, the letter, the almond scent. She recalled a similar case in her youth, where a supposed burglar had been a convenient excuse for a family's secrets. The truth, she knew, lay closer to home. As she passed the chemist's shop, Miss Marple paused, noting its display of bottles and vials. Lydia Finch had been seen here, buying ink according to Mrs. Weatherby. Could she have purchased something else? Something deadly? Miss Marple made a mental note to inquire, but discreetly. The chemist, Mr. Jenkins, was a meticulous man, unlikely to sell anything dangerous without record. The village was alive with its usual rhythms. Children chasing a ball across the green, the postman cycling past with a wave, the vicar hurrying toward the church. Yet Miss Marple felt the undercurrent of unease, the glances exchanged between neighbors, the hushed tones of gossip. St. Mary Mead was a place of warmth, of community, but it was also a place where secrets festered, like weeds in a garden. Sitting on a bench by the pond, Miss Marple pulled out her knitting, her needles moving with the rhythm of her thoughts. The midnight visitor was a false trail, she was certain, but it had revealed something vital. Someone wanted the village looking outward, away from the manor and its inhabitants. Reginald's debts, Lydia's ink-stained hands, Victor's jealousy, Bessie's whispers, each was a thread, but the pattern was still unclear. The missing ink bottle, jasmine, and the faint tang of chimney smoke, as families settled in for the night. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl wrapped snugly against the evening chill, sat in her cottage, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she pondered the day's discoveries. The midnight visitor, now fading into the realm of village exaggeration, had been a distraction. But the clues from Greystone Manor, the bitter ink, the almond-like scent, the smudged letter, remained vivid in her mind. Each was a thread in a tapestry of deceit, and Miss Marple was determined to weave them into a pattern. Her visit to the manor and the tea-room had painted a picture of motives. Reginald Greystone's debts, Lydia Finch's quiet resentment, Victor Hale's envy, Bessie Turner's whispered fears, and even Mr. Hargrove's grudge over stolen ideas. Yet the missing bottle of Prussian blue ink from the bookseller's shop lingered like a stubborn knot. Could it be the key to Lady Greystone's poisoning? Miss Marple knew that answers often hid in the mundane, in the habits and oversights of everyday life. With a quiet resolve, she decided to return to Greystone Manor the next morning, armed with a pretext to examine the scene of the crime more closely. The following day dawned bright, the sun climbing over the hills to bathe St. Mary Mead in warmth. Miss Marple, her straw hat tilted against the glare and her knitting bag slung over her arm, made her way to the manor under the guise of delivering a condolence bouquet from her garden. The roses, carefully clipped that morning, were a perfect excuse to linger, and she knew the manor's inhabitants would be too polite or too distracted to question her presence. At Greystone Manor, the atmosphere was one of strained civility. The rusted gates creaked as she entered, and the overgrown gardens seemed to whisper secrets in the breeze. Constable Reed, still stationed at the entrance, greeted her with a nod. "Morning, Miss Marple. Back with flowers, are you? The family's in the library now, going through papers. Inspector Slack's off chasing that midnight prowler nonsense." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. "Kind of you to keep fingers moving with mechanical precision." Victor Hale leaned against a bookshelf, flipping through a volume with feigned nonchalance, his polished smile faltering slightly. Bessie Turner, dusting a nearby shelf, kept her eyes down, her apron twisted in her hands as always. "Miss Marple, how thoughtful," Reginald said, his voice strained as he accepted the bouquet. Aunt Eleanor loved roses. She'd have appreciated this. Lydia looked up, her eyes narrowing briefly before softening. "Yes, very kind," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Lady Greystone's papers are a mess, I'm afraid." She was so consumed with her novel. Victor chuckled, closing his book with a snap. Eleanor's novels were her life. Too much so, perhaps. All that scribbling, night after night. No wonder her heart gave out. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the desk where Lady Greystone had died, now cleared of the inkwell but still bearing the faint stain of spilled blue. "Such a tragedy," she said softly, setting the bouquet down. "Might I have a moment to look at her desk? I've always admired a writer's workspace. It says so much about their mind." Reginald hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. Not much to see, though. The police took most everything." As Miss Marple approached the desk, her eyes scanned every detail. The polished mahogany surface, the smudged letter still tucked beneath a blotter, the faint scratches where the inkwell had tipped. She knelt slightly, as if adjusting her shawl, and peered beneath the desk, where a crumpled piece of paper lay half hidden in the shadows. With a deft movement, she retrieved it, unfolding it to reveal a letter in Lady Greystone's elegant hand. The ink was smudged, but the words were clear. "Victor, your threats are tiresome. Expose me if you must, but the truth will cost you more." A threat of plagiarism, perhaps? Miss Marple tucked the letter into her knitting bag, her face serene but her mind racing. Turning to Lydia, she said casually, "You must have been—" It was heated. Something about her novel, and secrets she shouldn't tell. Victor laughed, a touch too loudly. "Writers argue, Miss Marple. It's in our blood. Eleanor was stubborn, always digging into things best left alone." Miss Marple nodded, her smile disarming. The letter, the arguments, the bitter ink, these were no coincidences. She recalled a case from her youth where a hidden letter had revealed a blackmail scheme, and she wondered if Victor's threats were more than bluster. But Lydia's nervous fidgeting and Bessie's revelation of a grudge. Lady Greystone had dismissed Bessie's sister from service years ago, added new layers to the puzzle. As she prepared to leave, the village fete began to stir outside, its music and laughter drifting through the manor's open windows. The fete was a yearly tradition, a celebration of St. Mary Mead's community spirit, with stalls of homemade jams, games for the children, and a tea tent where gossip flowed freely. Miss Marple saw an opportunity to observe the suspects in a less guarded setting, and she made a mental note to attend. Stepping outside, she paused by the manor's rose garden, where a single petal lay crushed on the path, as if trodden by a hurried foot. The almond scent lingered in her memory, a hallmark of cyanide, and she thought of the chemist's shop, where Lydia had been seen. Had she purchased more than ink? Miss Marple's mind turned to the smudged letter, its words a clue to Victor's motives, but also to the novel Lady Greystone had been writing. A book about village secrets, Bessie had said, secrets worth killing for. The fete was in full swing as Miss Marple reached the village green. Children darted between stalls, their faces sticky with toffee, while Mrs. Price presided over the tea tent, her apron now free of ink stains. Miss Marple joined her, accepting a cup of tea and scanning the crowd. Reginald was there, tossing rings at a game stall, his laughter forced. Lydia stood apart, her eyes fixed on the ground, while Victor charmed a group of villagers with tales of London. Bessie helped at the jam stall, her nervous manner held the truth. Tomorrow, she would dig deeper, her quiet observations cutting through the village's warm veneer to expose the darkness beneath. Chapter 6. The Red Herring of Rivalry. The sun shone brightly over St. Mary Mead, its rays dancing across the village green where the annual fete was in full swing. Laughter and music filled the air, mingling with the scents of freshly baked cakes, ripe strawberries, and the faint tang of lemonade. Children darted between stalls, their faces painted with glee, while villagers bartered over homemade jams and competed in games of hoopla and coconut shy. Yet beneath the festive cheer, a shadow lingered, the shadow of Lady Eleanor Greystone's death, which hung over the village like a storm cloud waiting to break. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat shielding her eyes from the glare, and her knitting bag tucked under her arm, moved through the crowd with the quiet grace of one who saw more than she let on. The clues she had gathered, the bitter ink, the almond-like scent, the threatening letter from Victor Hale, were threads in a tapestry, and the fete, with its gathering of suspects, promised to reveal another stitch in the pattern. Miss Marple's visit to Greystone Manor that morning had yielded the hidden letter, a damning clue that pointed to Victor's threats of exposing Lady Greystone's past plagiarism. Yet she knew from experience that such obvious clues could be deceptive, like a brightly colored flower that hid thorns. The fete offered a chance to observe the suspects in a more relaxed setting, where guards might slip and truths might surface. As she strolled past the tea tent, where Mrs. Price presided with her usual bustle, Miss Marple's eyes scanned the crowd for Reginald Greystone, Lydia Finch, Victor Hale, and Bessie Turner, each a figure in the puzzle of Lady Greystone's death. Reginald was at the ring-toss stall, his laughter loud but brittle as he tossed rings with a group of young men. His suit, though finely tailored, showed signs of wear, and his eyes darted nervously, as if expecting a creditor to appear. Lydia stood alone near the flower stall, her ink-stained finger about, threatening Lady Greystone. "Reckon he's the one what poisoned her ink?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she pulled her knitting from her bag, her mind turning over the news. Inspector Slack's haste was predictable, like a dog chasing its own tail. The letter was incriminating, but too convenient, like a plot twist in one of Victor's thrillers. "Arrested, you say?" she murmured. "How interesting. And what do the villagers make of it?" Mrs. Price leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Most reckon it's him. Jealous of her success, you know. His books ain't sellin' like hers. But some say it's Reginald, what with his debts. And Bessie, she's been whispering about her sister, sacked by Lady Greystone years back. Bad blood, that." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her thoughts drifting to a case from her youth where a jealous scribe had framed a rival with a forged letter. Victor's arrest felt too neat, a red herring designed to distract from the true culprit. She recalled his polished demeanor at the manor, his laughter too loud, his threats too overt. A guilty man, she mused, would be more subtle. Or would he? Human nature was unpredictable, and St. Mary Mead was no stranger to its complexities. As she watched the fete, a commotion erupted near the cake stall. A tray of Victoria sponges had been knocked over, and a young girl, no more than 10, clutched her stomach, claiming the cake tasted funny. The crowd buzzed with panic, whispers of poison spreading like wildfire. Miss Marple rose, her shawl slipping slightly as she moved to the stall, her voice calm but authoritative. Now, let's not jump to conclusions," she said, kneeling beside the girl. "What did it taste like, dear?" The girl, her face pale, mumbled, "Like almonds, miss. Bitter." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained serene. Almonds, the hallmark of cyanide, the same scent she'd noted at the manor. She examined the cake, a crumbling slice on the ground, and noted a faint blue tinge, like the Prussian blue ink from Lady Greystone's pen, but as poison. "It's unsettling the village. First Lady Greystone, now this cake. Do you think it's connected?" Miss Marple's needles clicked, her scarf growing steadily. "Fear is a powerful tool, Reverend," she said softly. "Like a shadow, it can make small things seem large. But shadows always point to something real." She thought of the letter, the ink, the almond scent. The cake was a distraction, like the midnight visitor, but it confirmed her suspicion. The murderer was close, manipulating events to keep suspicion scattered. As the fete continued, Miss Marple observed the suspects more closely. Reginald's nervous laughter had given way to silence, his eyes scanning the crowd as if expecting trouble. Lydia's handkerchief was now a crumpled ball, her ink-stained fingers betraying her agitation. Victor's charm faltered when a villager mentioned his arrest, his smile tightening. Bessie, clearing the cake stall, dropped a jar, her face flushing as she scrambled to clean it. Miss Marple's mind turned to the manor, where the true clues lay. The letter from Victor was a red herring, she was certain, planted or exaggerated to shift blame. But Lydia's nervous habits, biting her nails, clutching her handkerchief, suggested a deeper unease. And Bessie's grudge, tied to her sister's dismissal, hinted at a motive Miss Marple hadn't fully explored. She recalled a case in a neighboring village where a maid's resentment had simmered into murder, masked by loyalty. As the fete wound down, the sun dipping toward the horizon, Miss Marple made her way to the chemist's shop, a small establishment at the edge of the village. Mr. Jenkins, the chemist, was a meticulous man. His shelves lined with bottles and vials, his ledger a record of every sale. "Good afternoon, Mr. Jenkins," she said, her tone light. "I was wondering about ink, Prussian blue specifically. Have you sold any lately?" Mr. Jenkins adjusted his spectacles, flipping through his ledger. "Ink. Not much call for." The poisoned cake, Victor's arrest, all were distractions, but they pointed to a cunning mind at work. The letter, the ink, the almond scent. These were the true clues hidden in the everyday moments of St. Mary Mead. She thought of Lady Greystone's novel, its secrets threatening to expose someone's shame. Tomorrow she would return to the manor, her quiet observations cutting through the village's warm veneer to reveal the darkness beneath. Chapter 7. Threads Unraveling. The morning sun rose gently over St. Mary Mead, its rays filtering through the ancient oaks and casting a soft glow on the village's cobblestone lanes. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew-kissed grass and the faint sweetness of blooming roses from cottage gardens. The village was stirring back to life after the fete's excitement, but the shadow of Lady Eleanor Greystone's death lingered, a quiet unease beneath the surface of daily routines. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy cottage, her knitting needles clicking with a rhythm that matched her thoughts. The clues she had gathered, the bitter ink, the almond-like scent, the threatening letter, the poisoned cake scare, were threads in a tapestry, and she sensed the pattern was beginning to emerge. The false leads, like the midnight visitor and the tainted cake, had been distractions, but they had revealed a cunning hand at work, sowing chaos to obscure the truth. Her visit to the chemist's shop had confirmed that Lydia Finch had purchased a bottle of Prussian blue ink, and the missing potassium ferrocyanide, a compound that could be altered to produce cyanide, had sharpened her suspicions. The threatening letter from Victor Hale, though incriminating, felt too convenient. a classic red herring. Miss Marple knew from years of observing human nature that the truth often lay in the overlooked details. The habits, the glances, the small inconsistencies. With a quiet resolve, she decided to return to Greystone Manor, where the library and its secrets might yield the next crucial discovery. As she walked along the lane, her straw hat shielding her, a polite smile ready for Constable Reed. He was still at his post, looking weary but alert. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, tipping his cap. "You're a regular visitor now." The family's in the library again, sorting through Lady Greystone's things. Inspector slacks off questioning Mr. Hale, but he's due back soon. "Thank you, Constable," Miss Marple replied, her voice soft but purposeful. "I've brought a small note of condolence for the family. I shan't be long." She stepped into the entrance hall, its chandelier glinting faintly in the morning light, and followed the footman to the library. The library was a haven of quiet, its towering bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes and the faint scent of old paper. The air held a trace of that almond-like odor, fainter now, but still present, a reminder of the poison that had claimed Lady Greystone's life. Reginald stood by a window, his hands clasped behind his back, his face pale. Lydia sat at a table, her ink-stained fingers sorting through manuscripts, her movements precise but tense. Victor was absent, likely at the police station, while Bessie dusted a shelf, her apron twisted in her hands as always. "Miss Marple, how kind of you to visit again," Reginald said, his voice strained but polite. "We're trying to make sense of Aunt Eleanor's papers. She left such a tangle." Lydia looked up, her eyes guarded. "Her novel was nearly complete," she said softly. "It's a pity she didn't finish. It was revealing." Her voice held a note of something, pride, perhaps, or bitterness. Miss Marple set her condolence note on the table, her eyes drifting to the shelves. "Such a fine collection," she remarked, her tone casual. "Lady Greystone must have spent hours here. Did she have a favorite book, Miss Finch? One she turned to often?" Lydia hesitated, her fingers twitching. She liked her reference books, history, toxicology, that sort of thing. She was meticulous about her research. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. Toxic clue, but their timing was curious. After the death, Bessie had said, was Lydia covering her tracks? Or had someone else consulted the book to mislead? She recalled a case from her youth, where a planted clue had nearly derailed an investigation, and she resolved to tread carefully. As she chatted with Reginald, Miss Marple learned of a surprising development. He had returned from a sudden trip to London, where he'd retrieved a new will from Lady Greystone's solicitor. "Aunt changed it last week," he said, his voice heavy. "Cut me out entirely. Left everything to the church. I didn't know until yesterday." Reverend Clement, who had just entered the library, blushed at the mention. "It's true," he said, tugging at his collar. "She spoke to me about it, said it was for the village's good. I was as surprised as anyone." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she pulled her knitting from her bag, her mind racing. A new will, favoring the church, shifted motives dramatically. Reginald's disinheritance removed his financial incentive, but it deepened the mystery. Had Lady Greystone suspected danger, or was the will a forgery, designed to mislead? She thought of Lydia's precise handwriting, so like the annotations in the toxicology book. As she prepared to leave, Miss Marple paused by the desk, her eyes catching a faint glint beneath a pile of papers. a small glass vial, empty but for a trace of blue residue, hidden in a drawer. She left it untouched, noting its position. "Such a lovely room," she said, her voice light. "It holds so many stories." Outside, the village was alive with its usual rhythms. The postman cycling past, children playing on the green, the blacksmith's hammer ringing in the distance, yet Miss Marple felt the weight of the clues she'd gathered. The toxicology book, the fingerprints, the new will, the hidden vial. Each was a thread, and the pattern was becoming clearer. She recalled Bessie's nervous claim at the fete that she'd been near the chemist's shop the day the ink was purchased. Had she seen more than she admitted? At the vicarage, Miss Marple stopped to speak with Reverend. Fingerprints' timing hinted at a cover-up. The new will, if genuine, cleared Reginald, but implicated someone with access to Lady Greystone's papers. Lydia, perhaps, or even the Reverend, though his blush seemed genuine. The vial with its blue residue was the strongest clue yet, linking directly to the poisoned ink. Sitting by her hearth that evening, Miss Marple spread the crumpled letter from Victor on her table, alongside her mental notes. The threads were unraveling, but the murderer was clever, hiding behind distractions like the poisoned cake and the midnight visitor. She thought of Lydia's nervous habits, Bessie's grudge, Reginald's disinheritance, and Victor's convenient arrest. The truth, she knew, was close, buried in the everyday moments of St. Mary Mead. Moments she would uncover with the patience of a gardener tending her roses. Chapter 8. The Narrowing Circle. The late morning sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a gentle glow, its rays filtering through the ancient elms and casting dappled patterns on the cobblestone lanes. The village hummed with its usual rhythm, the clatter of the milkman's cart, the laughter of children on the green, the distant chime of the church bells. But an undercurrent of unease lingered, a silent acknowledgement of the shadow cast by Lady Eleanor Greystone's death. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat tilted against the light and her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, sat in her cottage. Her knitting needles paused as she reviewed the tapestry of clues she had woven. The toxicology book with its ink-smudged fingerprints, the new will favoring the church, the empty vial with its blue residue, and the ever-present almond-like scent. These were no mere threads, but a pattern nearing completion. The false leads, like the midnight visitor and the poisoned cake, had been deft distractions. But Miss Marple's sharp eyes saw through them, and she knew the truth was close. Her discoveries at Greystone Manor had tightened the circle of suspects. Reginald Greystone, now disinherited and thus less likely driven by greed. Gathering. As Miss Marple walked to the vicarage, her knitting bag slung over her arm, she noted the village's warmth, the postman's cheerful wave, the scent of fresh bread from Mrs. Price's bakery. Yet her mind was fixed on the task ahead. Tea, she knew, had a way of loosening tongues, and she intended to watch closely. The vicarage drawing room was a cozy haven, its walls lined with books and its windows open to the garden, letting in the hum of bees and the scent of roses. A polished table held a silver tea service, scones, and a pot of Darjeeling, its steam curling upward like a whispered secret. Reverend Clement greeted the guests with his usual kindness, though his eyes betrayed worry. "A sad occasion," he said, pouring tea, "but a chance to honor Lady Greystone's memory." Miss Marple took her seat, her knitting needles clicking softly as she observed the group. Reginald sat stiffly, his hands clasped, his face pale but composed. Lydia perched on the edge of her chair, her ink-stained fingers fidgeting with a napkin. Victor lounged with forced ease, his smile as polished as ever, though his eyes darted to the others. Bessie, invited as a courtesy to the manor staff, stood near the door, her apron crisp but her hands twisting nervously. "Thank you all for coming," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but firm. "Lady Greystone's death has touched us all, and I thought a moment of reflection might do us good. She was a remarkable woman, wasn't she? So particular about her work, her pen, her ink." Lydia's napkin twitched, her eyes dropping to her lap. "She was meticulous," she murmured. "Her novel was to be her legacy, a story of St. Mary Mead's secrets." Victor chuckled, a touch too loudly. "Eleanor loved her secrets, didn't she? Always digging into things best left alone. That novel, pure fiction of course, but it ruffled feathers." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her gaze steady. "Feathers, Mr. Hale? Like your own, perhaps? I understand there was some." She poured herself more tea. "I listen, Bessie. And I've noticed things, small things, like the ink stains on your apron, Miss Finch. Always fresh, aren't they? And Mr. Hale's letter so conveniently found. Mr. Greystone's new will, cutting him out. And Bessie, your sister's dismissal. Such a heavy burden for a young heart." The room grew still, the only sound the clink of teacups and the hum of bees outside. Miss Marple's words, gentle but deliberate, hung in the air, each a subtle prod at the suspects' facades. She watched their hands. Victor's clean and manicured, Reginald's calloused from nervous habits, Bessie's rough from work, and Lydia's stained with ink. But one stain on Lydia's thumb was fresher, a vivid blue that matched the manor's inkwell. As the tea continued, Miss Marple steered the conversation to Lady Greystone's novel. "I hear it was scandalous," she said, her tone light. "Secrets about the village. Did she share it with anyone, Miss Finch?" Lydia's napkin crumpled in her hands. "Only fragments. She was protective. I typed her drafts, but she kept the final chapters locked away." Reverend Clement, stirring his tea, added, "She spoke of it at the church, said it would set things right. I thought it was about her legacy, but now..." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind racing. A novel that set things right. Perhaps it exposed a truth someone feared. She recalled the smudged letter, Victor's threats, and the toxicology book's fingerprints. The vial in the desk drawer with its blue residue was the strongest clue yet, but it required context. Had Lydia tampered with the ink, or was she a scapegoat? The gathering was interrupted by a sudden clatter outside. A village cat, chasing a sparrow, had knocked over a vase in the vicarage garden. As the group turned to look, Miss Marple's eyes caught a glint in the hedge. A small glass vial, identical to the one in the manor, empty but for a trace of blue. She rose, her shawl slipping slightly, and retrieved it discreetly, noting the faint almond scent. "Oh dear." The circle was narrowing. Lydia's fresh ink stains, the vial's discovery, the novel's secrets all pointed to a motive rooted in betrayal. Yet Bessie's grudge, Reginald's disinheritance, and Victor's release kept the pattern incomplete. She recalled a case from her youth where a secretary's loyalty had masked a deeper resentment, and she wondered if Lydia's devotion hid a similar truth. At her cottage, Miss Marple spread her clues on the table. The crumpled letter, the mental image of the vial, the memory of Lydia's stained thumb, the village's warmth, the children's laughter, the scent of roses wrapped around her. But her mind was fixed on the darkness beneath. The truth was close, and tomorrow's confrontation at the manor would bring it to light, stitch by careful stitch. Chapter 9. The Revelation in the Drawing Room. The afternoon sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting a warm golden glow across the village's cobblestone lanes and thatched cottages. The air was thick with the scent of blooming roses and freshly cut grass, but an undercurrent of tension pulsed beneath the village's serene facade. The death of Lady Eleanor Greystone had stirred the quiet community, and whispers of poison had transformed neighborly chatter into wary glances. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat tilted against the light and her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, walked purposefully toward Greystone Manor, her knitting bag slung over her arm. The clues she had gathered, the bitter ink, the almond-like scent, the threatening letter, the toxicology book, the new will and the hidden vials had woven a tapestry that now revealed a clear pattern. Today, in the manor's drawing room, she would confront the suspects and unravel the truth, stitch by careful stitch. The manor loomed at the edge of the village, its ivy-clad walls catching the sunlight in a patchwork of green and shadow. The rusted gates creaked as Miss Marple entered, her steps measured but resolute. Constable Reed, still stationed at the entrance, tipped his cap, his face a mix of curiosity and fatigue. "Back again, Miss Marple," he said. A hint of spilled ink remained, a silent testament to her final moments. Inspector Slack stood by the window, his face red with impatience, while the suspects, Reginald Greystone, Lydia Finch, Victor Hale, and Bessie Turner, sat or stood in uneasy silence. Reverend Clement was also present, invited at Miss Marple's request, his kindly face etched with concern. "Miss Marple, what's this about?" Inspector Slack barked, his arms crossed. "I've got enough on my plate without your tea party gatherings." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "Patience, Inspector. I believe we can put this matter to rest. Lady Greystone's death was no heart attack but a murder, cleverly planned and executed with poison." The room stilled, the only sound the faint rustle of leaves outside. She set her knitting bag on a table, her movements deliberate, and began. "Lady Greystone was poisoned by cyanide, delivered through the ink in her fountain pen," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "She had a habit, well known to those close to her, of licking the pen nib to start the ink flowing, an old writer's quirk. Someone used this habit to their advantage, substituting her Prussian blue ink with a deadly mixture." Eyes widened, and breaths caught. Reginald's hands clenched. Lydia's napkin crumpled in her lap. Victor's smile froze, and Bessie's apron twisted tighter. Inspector Slack snorted. "Cyanide? That's a stretch, Miss Marple. We've no proof of that." "Oh, but we do," she replied, her tone gentle but firm. "The almond-like scent in this room, the blue lips noted by Dr. Haydock, the bitter taste Lady Greystone complained of, these are hallmarks of cyanide. And then there's the vial I found, hidden in the desk drawer, and another in the vicarage hedge, both with traces of blue residue, and that telltale scent." Lydia's face paled, her fingers trembling. Victor leaned forward, a bruised ego. She turned to Bessie, whose eyes were wide with fear. Bessie, your grudge over your sister's dismissal gave you motive, and your presence near the chemist's shop raised questions. But your loyalty to Lady Greystone, despite your pain, shines through. You saw something, didn't you? Something you're afraid to tell. Bessie's voice trembled. I saw Miss Finch with the ink bottle, miss, the day before Milady died. She was in the library, late, when she thought no one was watching. Lydia gasped, her napkin falling to the floor. That's a lie. I was organizing her papers, nothing more. Miss Marple's gaze settled on Lydia, her voice soft but piercing. Miss Finch, you were Lady Greystone's shadow, typing her manuscripts, ordering her ink, knowing her habits intimately. Your fingers, always stained with ink, bear a fresh mark, vivid blue, unlike the faded stains of daily work. The toxicology book in the library, with your fingerprints on the cyanide page, was consulted after her death, as if to cover your tracks. And the vials, one in the desk, one in the hedge, point to someone with access to her private spaces. Lydia's face crumpled, her hands shaking. I loved her work. I only wanted to help her. Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes kind but unrelenting. You loved her work but resented her success. For years you labored in her shadow, your own writing unacknowledged. Her novel, full of village secrets, threatened to expose your own, perhaps a past you wished to keep hidden. You bought the ink from the chemist, claiming it was for her, but you tampered with it, using cyanide from the stolen potassium ferrocyanide. You forged the new will to implicate Reginald, sowing confusion. But your nails, bitten from guilt, and your nervous habits betrayed you. The room was silent, all eyes on Lydia. Inspector Slack's jaw dropped, his bluster gone. Reverend Clement clutched his teacup, his face pale. Everywhere, Reverend. Like a scarf. Their patterns repeat, if you know where to look. As the group dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on the desk. The truth had been revealed, but the novel, Lydia's stolen work, remained a mystery. Perhaps, she thought, it would find its way to light in time. Chapter 10. Tea and Tranquility. The morning sun rose gently over St. Mary Mead, its rays filtering through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns across the polished floor. The village was waking to a new day, the air filled with the scent of blooming roses and the distant chime of church bells. The shadow of Lady Eleanor Greystone's death, which had loomed over the community like a storm cloud, was lifting, replaced by the quiet hum of daily life. Children playing on the green, the clatter of the milkman's cart, the soft rustle of leaves in the summer breeze. Inside her cozy sitting room, Miss Marple sat in her chintz-covered armchair, a silver tea tray before her, her knitting needles clicking with a rhythm that mirrored the steady pulse of the village. The mystery had been solved, the truth revealed in the dramatic confrontation at Greystone Manor. And now, over a pot of steaming Darjeeling, she would share the final threads of the story with those closest to the case. The drawing-room revelation had left St. Mary Mead both shocked and relieved. Lydia Finch, the unassuming secretary, had confessed to poisoning Lady Greystone's ink with cyanide, driven by years of resentment over her unacknowledged contributions to the authoress's work. Inspector Slack, though initially skeptical, had taken Lydia into custody, his bluster giving way to grudging respect for Miss Marple's insight.
The village, though shaken by the betrayal of one of its own, was beginning to heal, its warmth and community spirit reasserting themselves like roses blooming after a storm. Miss Marple had invited Reverend Clement and her maid Dolly Bantry to her cottage for morning tea, a ritual that promised both comfort and clarity as she unraveled the final details of the case. The sitting room was a haven.
Must tell us everything. Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking softly as she worked on her intricate scarf. Human nature, Dolly, is like a well-worn path, she said, her voice soft but clear. It follows patterns, and once you know those patterns, the truth becomes clear. Would you like to hear how it all came together? Reverend Clement leaned forward, his teacup cradled in his hands. Please, Miss Marple. I confess I'm still reeling. Lydia seemed so devoted to Lady Greystone. To think she harbored such resentment. Miss Marple sipped her tea, the steam curling upward like a memory. Let us start at the beginning, she said, her tone gentle but deliberate. Lady Greystone was found dead at her desk, her lips blue, her fountain pen in hand, the inkwell spilled. Dr. Haydock called it a heart attack, but the blue lips and the almond-like scent in the room pointed to cyanide, a poison I've encountered before, in a case long ago where a jilted lover used it to deadly effect. Lady Greystone's habit of licking her pen nib to start the ink was well known to those close to her, a small quirk that became her undoing. Dolly gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Licking the pen? Oh, miss, that's wicked, using her own habit against her. Miss Marple nodded, her needles moving steadily. Indeed, Dolly. The murderer needed intimate knowledge of her routine, which narrowed the circle to those in the manor. Reginald Greystone, her nephew, seemed a likely suspect at first. His gambling debts were no secret, and he stood to inherit the estate. But the new will, cutting him out in favor of the church, changed everything. His genuine surprise when he learned of it convinced me he was innocent. Reverend Clement's face softened, though his brow furrowed. That will. Lady Greystone spoke of it vaguely, saying it was for the village's good. I never imagined it would play such a role. It was a clever misdirection, Miss Marple continued, her eyes twinkling. I suspected it might be forged to shift suspicion to Reginald. Reverend Clement stirred his tea, his voice soft. But Lydia, how did you know it was her? She seemed so loyal, so unassuming. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze steady. Lydia Finch was the shadow behind Lady Greystone's light. For years she typed manuscripts, managed correspondence, and ordered ink, her own writing unacknowledged. Lady Greystone's new novel, full of village secrets, was Lydia's work, rewritten and claimed as her own. That betrayal fueled her resentment. She knew Lady Greystone's habits intimately, including the pen-licking quirk. When she bought the Prussian blue ink from the chemist, she saw her chance. The missing potassium ferrocyanide from Mr. Jenkins's shop, altered to produce cyanide, was her weapon. Dolly shivered, clutching her teacup. But the vials, miss. Those little bottles you found, how did they fit in? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. The vials were the key, Dolly. One was hidden in the desk drawer, another in the vicarage hedge, both with traces of blue ink and the almond scent of cyanide. Lydia was careless, or perhaps desperate,
leaving them where they could be found. Her ink-stained fingers, always fresh with that vivid blue, betrayed her. And the toxicology book in the library, with her fingerprints on the cyanide page, was consulted after the death, as if to cover her tracks. Her bitten nails, her nervous habits, they were signs of guilt, like a thread fraying under strain. Reverend Clement shook his head, his voice heavy. Such a tragedy. Lydia gave so much to Lady Greystone, only to feel betrayed. But to resort to murder. Miss Marple nodded, her scarf growing steadily. Human nature, Reverend, is predictable, like a well-worn path. Lydia's resentment mirrored a case I knew years ago. A secretary in a neighboring village, scorned and overlooked, who turned to poison. The patterns repeat if you know where to look. Dolly leaned forward, her voice eager. Smudged letter. The almond scent. She recalled a saying from her youth. The devil's in the details. In St. Mary Mead, it was the details that brought justice, woven together with the patience of a gardener tending her roses. The tea drew to a close, and Reverend Clement rose, his face lighter. Thank you, Miss Marple. You've brought peace to our village in your quiet way. Dolly beamed, gathering the cups. You're a marvel, miss. I'll be telling this story for years. Miss Marple and the poisoned ink. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her scarf nearly complete. Just a matter of observation, Dolly, she said, her voice gentle. Now, let's enjoy the tea. The village is at peace, and that's enough for today. As her guests left, Miss Marple sat by her window, her eyes on the green. St. Mary Mead was a place of warmth, of community, but also of secrets, buried like seeds in a garden. She would always be watching, her knitting a quiet companion to her thoughts, ready for the next mystery to unravel.